On my first day in the Hollingsworth estate, my stepbrother Adrian looked me up and down and said, "You'll never be one of us." 10 years later, he was sitting across from me in the boardroom, begging for a job at the company I now owned. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told you don't belong, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and join me as I take you through a decade-long journey where revenge isn't just served, it's served with precision. The moment I stepped into the Hollingsworth estate, I knew I didn't belong. The marble floors gleamed too perfectly, the air smelled too expensive, and the silence in the grand foyer was the kind that made you feel watched. My mother, Marina, squeezed my hand with a warm smile, but it was the only warmth I'd feel that day. Victor Hollingsworth, her new husband, was waiting for us. Sharp suit, silver hair, and eyes that never seemed to blink. He greeted me with a kind word and a handshake too firm for comfort. "Welcome to your new home, Isla." But before I could answer, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow. Heavy. Confident. Adrian. Victor's only son and heir to the entire Hollingsworth real estate empire, a chain of luxury developments stretching from San Francisco to Malibu. He was 22, lean, tall, dressed like a fashion campaign, and he looked at me as if I were a cockroach on his imported rug. "You must be Isla," he said flatly, looking me up and down. "So this is what we get in exchange for a marketing director with cheekbones." "Adrian," Victor snapped. But Adrian didn't even flinch. "This isn't your home," he said to me directly. "And it never will be." My heart pounded, but I said nothing. Not because I was scared, but because I was calculating. Even then. We moved in that week. My mother decorated our wing of the house with color and softness. Adrian made sure his wing felt like a fortress. Whenever I passed him in the halls, he made pointed phone calls. "No, she's not really family. Just a temporary inconvenience. She'll fade." I learned to keep my head down and disappear. But I was listening. And remembering. At school, I was used to being invisible. But here, in this palace of glass and judgment, I was unwanted. Adrian didn't scream, he didn't fight, he excluded. Every board dinner where I was mysteriously not invited. Every charity event I heard about after it happened. Every icy glance from his circle of family friends who treated me like Marina's charity project. Victor, blinded by his new happiness, didn't notice. Or maybe he chose not to. He believed in Marina. Respected her insight. And slowly, she became more than his wife, she became his closest advisor at Hollingsworth Properties. Adrian hated that. You could see it in how he curled his lip at her PowerPoint decks. How he rolled his eyes when Victor praised her suggestions. He wasn't used to sharing the spotlight, and certainly not with outsiders. But it was during one of those dinners that the real fracture happened. A quarterly investor gathering at the estate. My mother had convinced Victor to let me shadow her, take notes, observe, maybe get a sense of the business. I was 20 then, fresh from community college, trying to apply for MBA programs. It felt like an opportunity. Until Adrian made sure it wasn't. "I just want to thank Isla for her unique insights tonight," he said loudly, glass of champagne raised, interrupting a conversation about international expansion. "She read an article on real estate trends last week, and now she's an expert. Maybe we'll let her run the East Coast portfolio next month." Laughter followed. Cold. Polite. The kind that stabs. I looked at my mother. Her face was frozen. I looked at Victor. He seemed unsure. That night, I sat in my room and didn't cry. I researched. I pulled up Hollingsworth's financials. Their acquisitions. Their leadership bios. Their vulnerabilities. Adrian thought he had power because of his name. But real power, earned power, came from understanding the system better than anyone else. I made myself a promise that night. One day, Adrian would see me not as a joke, not as a threat, but as the person who rewrote his legacy while he wasn't looking. For the next year, I turned my pain into purpose. I enrolled in night classes while interning at a real estate analytics firm. I sat in the back of every meeting Marina led, taking notes she never asked me to. I studied Adrian's behavior like a chessboard, watching how he spoke to board members, how he lied, how he covered missteps. And missteps, there were. Adrian wasn't brilliant. He was privileged. His success came from pre-booked meetings, handed-down networks, and yes-men who flattered his ego. He didn't notice market trends shifting. He didn't see the opportunities in emerging tech. But I did. I watched. And I waited. And all the while, I built. Quietly. Patiently. What Adrian didn't realize was that every smirk, every insult, every time he belittled me, he wasn't breaking me down. He was making me sharper. Better. More dangerous. And one day, I'd make him regret ever underestimating me. Adrian didn't see it coming, because he never saw anything that didn't reflect his own face. While he floated from party to boardroom, yacht to gala, I was laying foundations. Quietly, steadily, and always beneath his radar. Every time he dismissed me, I planted another seed. Every time he excluded me, I found a new door. My first reel-in was a marketing assistant role at Hollingsworth Properties, not because of my name, but because I applied anonymously through a third-party recruiter and aced the interview. When they found out I was Victor's stepdaughter, eyebrows raised. But by then, I was already indispensable. I kept my head down and my ears open. The office was filled with whispers, gossip about Adrian's leadership, his indecisiveness, his growing tendency to lean on reputation rather than reason. I heard things he never imagined I'd hear. Did you see Adrian's pitch deck last week? Slides full of fluff. 3 client calls missed in a month. He's slipping. I wish Marina ran this place. At least she listens. I documented everything. Not out of spite, but for strategy. Because I knew the time would come when I'd need receipts, not emotions. Marina had become a powerhouse in the company, not by demanding respect, but by earning it. Her ideas doubled the firm's reach into underserved markets. She introduced inclusive design models that won awards. And yet, Adrian constantly undermined her. He'd roll into meetings late, contradict her points with no data, and then blame her when numbers didn't match his fantasy projections. Victor tried to play the peacekeeper. He told Marina, he'll grow out of it. He's just feeling displaced. But Marina wasn't naive. She saw Adrian clearly, not as a boy struggling to find his place, but as a man determined to guard a kingdom he never earned. Let him keep looking down on us, she whispered to me one night after dinner. The longer he does, the less he sees what's coming. I applied to Columbia's MBA program that winter and got in. Full scholarship. I didn't tell anyone, not even my mother. I took the acceptance letter, folded it gently, and placed it in a notebook I kept labeled, for later. My real education wasn't happening in lecture halls. It was happening right there, inside Hollingsworth Properties, in the tense meetings, the failed launches, the behind-the-scenes breakdowns I was assigned to clean up. I wasn't just learning business strategy. I was learning Adrian. Every flaw, every insecurity. He hated uncertainty, avoided conflict, craved validation. He needed to be the smartest person in the room, even if he wasn't. And most dangerously, he underestimated quiet competence. He thought control came from titles. But titles can be stripped. I began building a shadow network of allies inside the company. Middle managers. Analysts. Developers. People tired of Adrian's games. People who just wanted to do good work. We met in coffee shops. Shared frustrations. Collaborated on side projects. I took notes. I solved problems Adrian hadn't even noticed. And in return, they gave me loyalty, the kind money can't buy. One night, Marina walked into my room holding a small leather box. Victor proposed again, she said simply, opening it to reveal a ring. He wants to make it official this time. I hugged her tightly. I wasn't sure what I felt. Joy, maybe. Or fear. But mostly, fuel. Because I knew Adrian would see that ring not as a symbol of love, but as a declaration of war. The wedding was a closed affair. No press. Just family and a few close friends. Adrian arrived late and left early, his smile strained and his toast empty. Victor, however, seemed at peace for the first time in years. You know, he said, clinking glasses with me at the reception, you've got her strength. But your own fire. One day, you'll run circles around all of us. Adrian heard that. I saw his knuckles go white around his glass. He was losing control, and he knew it. Not because I was fighting him openly, but because I wasn't fighting at all. I was just succeeding. And success, for someone like Adrian, is the sharpest weapon you can wield. That year, Hollingsworth Properties held their annual leadership retreat, a week of strategy sessions and workshops in Aspen. Adrian, naturally, opened with a monologue about vision and legacy. But when Marina presented her department's numbers, the room lit up. Record profits. New partnerships. A 20% market expansion in 2 quarters. Applause. Genuine. Adrian clapped too, but I could see the heat crawling up his neck. I knew that look. I'd worn it once, when he humiliated me at that investor dinner. Now it was his turn to feel invisible. But instead of stepping up, Adrian lashed out. He started rewriting Marina's strategies. Undermining her leadership. He claimed credit for initiatives he'd once mocked. But the board wasn't blind anymore. They noticed who really kept the company afloat. Victor tried to intervene, again. You and Isla are more alike than you realize, he told Adrian. She's earned everything through discipline. You could learn from her. That night, Adrian didn't go home. He disappeared into the city's nightlife, lost in overpriced cocktails and bitterness. What he didn't know was that while he was out burning trust, I was earning capital. Quietly, I began investing in overlooked startups. Prop tech firms. Sustainability platforms. Smart home integrations. All the areas Adrian said weren't worth the time. I used fake names. Proxy partners. Silent deals. And I named my company Solstice Innovations. It was still small. Still in seed stages. But it had one clear goal. To outthink, outmaneuver, and eventually, absorb everything Adrian had ever taken for granted. Let him toast to bloodlines. I'd toast to strategy. Let him inherit a name. I'd build an empire. One he wouldn't even realize he was handing over, until the ink had dried. By the time Solstice Innovations had its first office, a tiny third-floor loft space above a print shop in downtown Santa Monica, Adrian was already losing pieces of his future, and he didn't even know it. The timing was perfect. While Adrian was off planning another launch party for a project that was already bleeding money, I was building a team. I hired smart, no egos, no headlines. Engineers who loved the problem more than the prestige. Data scientists who'd been passed over because they didn't look the part. Marketers who understood how to speak to the next generation of homeowners, not the old money elite Adrian obsessed over. I told them the truth, we're going up against a giant. But we don't need to outspend them. Just outsmart them. Meanwhile, Back at Hollingsworth Properties, cracks were forming. Victor had started stepping back. His health wasn't failing, but it was shifting: fewer hours, more advisory roles, and an obvious handoff of responsibilities. Everyone assumed Adrian was being groomed for the top, including Adrian. But Victor was watching. And so was the board. Because while Adrian made speeches, I made moves. The first major coup came with Rising Coast Developments, a mid-tier design-build firm looking to expand into smart home construction. Adrian had passed on them twice, calling them too niche. But I saw gold. We closed the deal in a week. That single acquisition gave Solstice access to contractors, technology, and a fresh reputation in eco-conscious real estate. Almost overnight, our systems outperformed Hollingsworth's outdated infrastructure. Adrian only found out when two of Hollingsworth's longtime partner firms pulled out of upcoming deals and signed with me instead. He exploded. Accusations flew. He demanded internal audits, staff reviews, even tried to accuse my mother of leaking insider info, a desperate, ugly move that backfired horribly when Victor called an emergency meeting and tore into him in front of the executive team. "She's not your enemy, Adrian," Victor said coldly. "But you're sure working hard to become hers." That should have humbled him. It didn't. Instead, Adrian doubled down. He threw lavish parties for clients who didn't show. Invested in bloated ad campaigns that didn't convert. Hired an overpriced PR firm to fix the narrative, which only made the board more nervous. Meanwhile, Solstice thrived in the shadows. We didn't need glitz. We had data. Efficiency. Real results. Every week, we brought in more clients, not by stealing them, but by being better. I stayed quiet. Publicly, I remained the assistant marketing director's daughter. I attended events in Marina's shadow, smiled politely, made small talk. But behind the scenes, I was building a dossier of every misstep Adrian made. At night, I laid out charts on my apartment floor, visualizing the weak points in Hollingsworth's empire. Projects that were over budget. Districts where delays were becoming routine. Departments run by loyalty instead of logic. I wasn't just planning to compete. I was planning a takeover. I just needed one thing: leverage. And Adrian handed it to me. It started with an offhand comment during a company retreat. A junior analyst, newly hired, eager to please, overheard Adrian bragging about managing numbers creatively to keep investor confidence high. That analyst came to me. Not because he knew what I was planning, but because he was scared. He's adjusting projections. Pressuring the accounting team to massage reports. I don't want to get caught in it. I thanked him. And I started digging. What I found was subtle, but dangerous. Adrian had been manipulating quarterly projections to make underperforming properties look viable. He was reclassifying expenses. Delaying invoices. Using shell contractors with vague billing trails. Nothing illegal. Yet. But definitely unethical. I didn't take it to Victor. Not yet. Because I needed more. So I kept watching. And collecting. Meanwhile, Adrian spiraled further. When I presented Solstice's newest design model at a small conference in San Diego, a low-cost, high-efficiency modular housing prototype, we were approached by a major international developer. They wanted exclusivity. We signed. And Hollingsworth lost one of their biggest potential overseas partners. Adrian. He blamed the market. Victor. He called me. We met at a quiet cafe near the marina. "I don't know what you're doing, Isla," he said after the coffee came, "but it's working." I said nothing. I don't want this family torn apart. But I can't ignore what's happening. Adrian is slipping. And you. You're rising. He paused, watching me closely. I need to know, are you coming for the company? I looked him in the eye. I'm not coming for anything. I'm building something better. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he nodded. And when he left, he didn't look angry. He looked relieved. The next week, I moved Solstice into a new building, modern, efficient, powered by solar panels and software I designed with my CTO. We opened a second office in Seattle. We were no longer a whisper. We were a wave. And Adrian? He was still standing on a shoreline made of sand. He just didn't know how fast the tide was rising. There's a difference between watching a storm form and feeling the first drop of rain on your skin. Adrian never saw the rain coming. By the time the board scheduled an unscheduled mid-quarter review, I already knew what was about to happen. I wasn't inside the boardroom, not yet, but my fingerprints were on every paper they were reviewing. It had taken months to compile. Each spreadsheet, email trail, whispered tip from an anxious assistant or overworked project manager. Together, they formed a mosaic of negligence, inflated budgets, missed deadlines, hushed-up cost overruns, and a few internal memos that had been edited after Victor signed them. Nothing outright criminal. But enough to call Adrian's leadership into question. And that was all I needed. Because perception, in business, is everything. But still, I wasn't ready to strike. Not yet. I needed the board to doubt him. I needed Victor to question. I needed Marina to remain silent and complicit. And I needed Adrian to keep thinking he was still the one holding the leash. The cracks were widening. Then came the gala. The annual Hollingsworth Foundation Gala wasn't just an event, it was a coronation. A who's who of developers, investors, socialites, and politicians. Marina usually ran the logistics, Adrian made the speech. But this year, Victor called me into his office. I want you to handle the keynote, he said. I blinked. Why me? Because you're the only one who's built something worth listening to. I sat in stunned silence. Then nodded once. Adrian was livid. What the hell is this? He demanded in Victor's study the next day. You're letting her speak for the company now. Victor didn't yell. He didn't flinch. He simply said, she earned it. That sentence shattered something in Adrian. I could see it in his eyes. Not rage, panic. The night of the gala, I wore black. Sleek. Understated. Tactical. I stood behind the velvet curtain, listening to the music swell, the murmurs of an audience full of faces I'd once studied from a corner. And then the announcer said my name. I walked out into a wall of lights. And I told them a story. Not about me. But about the future. About sustainability. About the role real estate plays in economic recovery. About what it means to design not just for profit, but for people. I wove in numbers. Hope. Strategy. And I ended with a line that I knew Adrian would never forget. I've always believed real power isn't inherited, I said. It's earned, through vision, discipline, and the willingness to build when others only seek to own. Applause erupted. I didn't look for Adrian. I didn't have to. Later, I'd hear from 3 investors who pulled their bids from Hollingsworth and redirected them to Solstice. I'd get emails from 5 board members. One read, "When you're ready, we're listening." And Victor. He raised a glass to me in the VIP section. But the most satisfying moment came when Marina slipped a folded note into my clutch as she kissed me goodbye that night. It simply read, "He's already lost. He just doesn't know it yet, asterisk asterisk." The next day, Adrian cornered me in the elevator. Gone was the smug indifference. In its place, a frantic, sweaty sort of desperation. What do you want? He hissed. You want to humiliate me. You want my job. Say it. I didn't even blink. I don't want your job, Adrian. I want mine. The one I built. The one you laughed at. And I want you to understand something. The doors opened. I stepped out. You're not losing because of me. You're losing because you still think you're untouchable. That week, I met with an old mentor, Cameron Vale, a retired CEO with connections deep in the real estate world. He agreed to come on board as an advisor to Solstice. His network was massive. His respect, ironclad. You're not just gaining ground, he told me. You're shifting the landscape. We launched a new initiative, a modular development project designed for post-disaster recovery zones. Government contracts followed. Meanwhile, Hollingsworth's Denver project stalled. Suppliers dropped. Permits expired. And Adrian blamed everyone but himself. Then came the internal leak. A whistleblower from Hollingsworth Properties sent an anonymous tip to the board. Adrian had authorized backdated documents to secure a project extension. Nothing illegal, but damning in terms of ethics. Victor was silent. But he looked tired. When the board met to reassess operational leadership, Adrian didn't even show up. He sent a statement through legal. Blamed disgruntled elements, false narratives, character assassinations. But no one believed it anymore. Because Adrian had made one mistake too many. He assumed loyalty was inherited too. That weekend, I got a call. Private number. Victor. I want to talk, he said. Come to the study. Sunday. Just you. I arrived early. He poured whiskey for himself. And green tea for me. You've done what I couldn't, he said, staring into the fire. You exposed the rot. Not just in Adrian, but in the structure I built around him. I waited. I'm stepping down, he continued. And I want the board to consider you as interim CEO. My pulse hammered. Me? You already are, Isla. In everything but title. I nodded slowly. And finally, I allowed myself to feel it. Not triumph. But momentum. The wheel had turned. And this time, I was the one holding the spokes. Power isn't taken in a single blow. It's siphoned, silently, drip by drip, until one day, the tank runs dry and the engine dies with a whisper. Adrian's tank was nearly empty. He didn't know it yet, but every party he threw, every headline he chased, every shareholder call he skipped, he was financing the downfall of his own legacy. And I was there to buy the pieces. The plan started 2 years earlier, when Solstice hit its first real stride. I began moving profits into shell investment firms. Clean, separate, untraceable, at least, not easily. Through these shells, I acquired small shares of Hollingsworth Properties as they became available on the open market. Adrian, in his need to impress and maintain status, had begun selling off chunks of his inheritance. Quietly. Privately. To cover the bleeding costs of projects and personal indulgences. Luxury apartment in Dubai. Paid for with a trust liquidation. Private jet lease. Another chunk of shares, gone. He assumed he was selling to family friends and longtime partners. But behind most of those names, was me. And by the time Victor stepped down and the board began considering next-gen leadership, I already controlled 17% of the company, enough to tip any vote, if I pushed hard enough. But I didn't push. Not yet. First, I needed Adrian to dig the hole deeper. So I gave him room. At the next press conference, he called Solstice a noisy startup that thrives on gimmicks. He mocked our post-disaster modular housing designs. dismissed our inclusive urban planning as PR fluff. Claimed that our little tech experiment would never match the power of the Hollingsworth name. What he didn't know was that 2 weeks earlier, one of his longest-running development partners, Kingston Bell Design Group, had quietly signed with Solstice to manage their West Coast expansion. The press didn't know. But the board did. And they were watching. One of them, an older man named Alan Cray, reached out to me directly. "You have a vision," he said during our coffee meeting in Palo Alto. "He has his surname." I knew then the tide had turned. But still, I waited. Until the final opening came, and Adrian walked right into it. He was preparing to unveil Hollingsworth's Next Horizon initiative, a $280 million smart city project on the Nevada-Arizona border. The press release was dramatic, the teaser campaign polished, and Adrian had spent months talking it up to potential backers. The only problem: Solstice owned the rights to the smart infrastructure software Adrian was trying to build from scratch. I knew because we'd bought the parent company 6 months earlier, through one of the shells Adrian had sold shares to. And when the licensing dispute was filed just 48 hours before his big reveal, Adrian nearly imploded. "You're trying to sabotage this company," he screamed at me in the hall after an emergency board meeting. "No," I said calmly. "You did that. I'm just not cleaning up your mess this time." The board met privately that evening. I wasn't present, but I didn't need to be. Because just before midnight, I received a text from Alan Cray. "Call a vote. You have the numbers." And I did. Through those shell companies, private investors, and proxies, I now held 51% of Hollingsworth properties. I didn't sleep that night. Not out of anxiety. But clarity. This wasn't just revenge anymore. It was redemption, not just for me, but for every person Adrian had silenced, dismissed, or overlooked. Every analyst, assistant, and designer he had talked over in meetings. Every woman who had been told her insight wasn't valuable. Every outsider told to stay in their lane. At 9 a.m. the next morning, the board assembled. Victor wasn't there. But Marina was. Adrian walked in late, wearing a fresh suit and a tired smile. He hadn't read the room. "Let's get this over with," he said, collapsing into his chair. I stood. "There's a motion on the floor," I said. "A merger proposal between Solstice Innovations and Hollingsworth Properties. To form a single entity, Solace Group." Adrian blinked. "You're joking." Backed by controlling interest, I continued, placing a folder in front of each board member, and paired with a leadership restructuring plan. "Which I'm prepared to implement immediately." He laughed, too loudly. "You don't have controlling interest." I didn't say anything. Alan Cray stood. "She does," he said. "And we've reviewed the documentation." Silence. Adrian grabbed a folder and flipped through pages. Slowly. Desperately. Each signature was a betrayal. Each transaction, a blind spot. Each company, a reflection of his carelessness. By the end, his hands were shaking. "You can't do this," he muttered. "You did this," I said softly. "I just paid attention." The vote passed. 8-1. Adrian never cast his. When the final tally was announced, I heard him exhale, like something had been ripped from his lungs. "I built this," he whispered. "No," I said. "You inherited it." "I built what comes next." The meeting concluded. The press release was drafted. The legal team began preparing the merger documents. And Adrian? He stayed seated. Motionless. Alone. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. Because for the first time in 10 years, I didn't see him as my enemy. I saw him as what he truly was. A man raised to believe he deserved the world. And broken by the moment he realized he had no idea how to hold it. When I walked out of that room, the hallway felt different. Wider. Brighter. And I understood, the empire I had just claimed wasn't about land, or assets, or a last name. It was about something far rarer. A legacy I had earned, brick by brick, betrayal by betrayal. And now, it was mine to protect. 3 days after the vote, Adrian stopped showing up. Not to the office. Not to the boardrooms. Not even to his favorite rooftop bar where he usually licked his wounds over $400 bottles of scotch. He vanished. And I let him. The company needed my focus. The merger with Solstice was delicate. Press were circling like vultures, waiting to see if the so-called stepdaughter startup queen could actually run the empire she'd just snatched out from under a bloodline heir. But unlike Adrian, I didn't build my power on ego. I built it on execution. We changed everything. The entire brand. The entire tone. Hollingsworth Properties, known for its cold, high-rise luxury, was evolving into Solace Group, an innovator in sustainable, human-centered development. What once was marble and steel was now glass, greenery, and purpose. But power has weight. And as my calendar filled with meetings, investor calls, and late-night walks through renderings of our new headquarters, I felt it pressing down. The victory was sweet. But not light. One rainy morning, Marina walked into my new office, now stripped of Adrian's old leather and gold decor and redone in natural oak and soft gray. "He's staying at the lake house," she said, setting a cup of tea on my desk. I raised an eyebrow. "And? He hasn't spoken to anyone. Not even Victor." That surprised me. Victor had been many things, distant, driven, controlling, but he loved Adrian in his own way. "He's not angry anymore," she added. "Just lost." I didn't answer. She stepped closer. "Isla," she said softly. "You got what you wanted. But the question is, what do you want now?" That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I regretted anything. But because part of me was wondering if winning the war had also meant killing the opportunity for peace. The next morning, I drove to the lake house. No assistants. No security. Just me, a coat, and the truth. He answered the door in sweatpants and a faded university hoodie, ironic, considering he'd dropped out of 3. His eyes were bloodshot. But not from crying. From not sleeping. "You?" he muttered. "Yes," I said. "I don't want pity." "Good," I replied. "I didn't bring any." He stepped aside. The house smelled like dust and failure. Furniture covered in sheets. Half-eaten delivery on the table. Adrian dropped into a chair and gestured vaguely toward the lake. "I was supposed to run all this," he said. "I know. I had the name. The legacy. You did." Silence. Then, without looking at me, "Are you here to rub it in?" "No," I said. "I'm here to offer you a job." He blinked. Slowly. Then laughed. Harsh and bitter. "You're serious." "Deadly." "Why?" I leaned forward. "Because you need to understand something, Adrian. I didn't beat you to destroy you. I beat you because you never learned to build." He stared at me, jaw clenched. "You're offering to hire me. I'm offering you a chance to rebuild. But from the bottom. No title. No office. No guarantees. You'll work under people you used to ignore. And they won't make it easy." His voice cracked. "Why would I even say yes? I stood. Because this time, you have a chance to become the man you pretended to be. And then I left. I didn't call. Didn't follow up. I just went back to work. 2 weeks later, he walked into the office. No entourage. No speech. Just a backpack and a notepad. I'm here to start. We assigned him to operations. Under a former Solstice project manager who once interned for Hollingsworth and quit because Adrian talked over her in every meeting. Poetic, really. His first week, he asked 0 questions and made 3 mistakes. His second, he apologized. Genuinely. To people he didn't even remember wronging. And in his third, he stayed late. To fix a logistics flow error. Without being asked. The board was surprised. But I wasn't. Because for the first time, Adrian wasn't trying to perform. He was trying to learn. I didn't forgive him overnight. Neither did anyone else. But we watched. And we waited. And slowly, we saw something we never expected. Humility. And it looked good on him. One evening, we were both working late. I found him in the analytics lab, staring at a dashboard. These numbers don't make sense, he muttered. They do, I said. You're just not reading them right. He looked up. You used to hate me. I shrugged. I still don't like you. He smiled for the first time. Not smug. Not rehearsed. Just, tired. But I respect the fact that you showed up. I turned to leave. But paused. You keep doing that, maybe you'll earn more than just a paycheck here. And maybe, just maybe, something like peace. Growth is messy. Redemption, even messier. 3 months into Adrian's probation, the buzz had settled. Internally, his presence still drew long stares and cautious greetings. Some employees waited for him to crack, others for him to lash out. But he didn't. He listened. He took notes. He asked real questions, not performative ones, and slowly, he started to contribute. Quietly. Effectively. And that made the board nervous. Not because he was improving, but because his very presence threatened the story they were now selling to the world, that Isla Winters had unseated a dynasty. That Solace Group was the fresh, pure reboot of a legacy that had grown stale. Adrian's comeback. It didn't fit their narrative. One night, I got the call. It was Alan Cray. We need to talk, Isla. We met in the executive lounge, dark leather, glass walls, and city lights flickering like static behind us. The investors are getting restless, he said bluntly. They like you. They trust you. But Adrian. They see a headline risk. I said nothing. They want him out. Not demoted. Gone. I looked him straight in the eyes. Based on what? His past. Alan didn't flinch. Based on what they remember. In their minds, he's the cautionary tale. You're the phoenix. Don't muddy the ark. I exhaled slowly. The irony hit hard. After all those years of clawing for a place at the table, I was now being asked to pull the chair out from under someone else. You have 72 hours, Alan added, rising. Before they start applying pressure, publicly. That night, I found myself back in the office lab, staring at the very dashboard Adrian had once fumbled through. Except now. He'd fixed it. Not only was it accurate, it was efficient, tagged, annotated, and clean. My stomach twisted. The next morning, before I could even process what I would say, the crisis hit. Our new East Bay project, a 200-unit modular development meant to be our flagship, was being threatened by a zoning reversal. Local officials, under pressure from legacy property holders, had pulled permits. Overnight, construction froze. Investors panicked. Media caught wind. The project was our biggest promise to date, and now, it was our biggest liability. The room turned to me. And for the first time in months, I didn't have an immediate answer. Then Adrian stepped forward. I can fix it. Every eye in the room locked on him. He continued, calmly. I've worked with the East Bay Chamber. I know the language. The stakeholders. Their fears. If you let me take point, under Islah's direction, I can get it back on track. Silence. And then, you've got 48 hours, I said. I assigned a small team, gave him an office the size of a janitor closet, and stayed out of his way. He worked non-stop. Meetings with city planners. Calls with environmental consultants. Personal visits to homeowner associations who opposed the site. He didn't deflect. He didn't delegate. He showed up. At one point, I stopped by the conference room to drop off documents and saw him hunched over a zoning map, eyes bloodshot, voice hoarse, but focused. When I handed him coffee, he didn't look up. Just said, thanks. And kept going. 46 hours later, we had our permits reinstated. With minor modifications, yes. But reinstated. The board was stunned. Alan pulled me aside. Well, that changes things. The press ate it up. Disgraced heir redeems himself by saving Solace project, and the investors, those same ones who'd wanted him gone, now wanted to sit down with him to discuss future opportunities. But I wasn't ready to celebrate. That night, Adrian walked into my office. He looked exhausted. But his eyes were clear. I'm not asking for a promotion, he said. Or a pat on the back. But I need to know, did I earn this? Or did I just buy myself a few more weeks? I studied him. He was different. Still flawed, still stubborn, but different. You earned a chance, I said. Don't waste it. He nodded. Not with triumph. But relief. Then, just before he turned to go, he paused. You know, he said, the day you took the company, I thought I hated you. I raised an eyebrow. I don't anymore. I didn't reply. Because I wasn't sure how I felt either. Not about him. But about us. Two broken kids raised in a house of glass and expectation. And somehow, against all odds, still standing. Later that week, Marina stopped by the office. She handed me a photo. It was from 10 years ago. Our first night at the Hollingsworth estate. Me, clinging to a suitcase. Adrian, in the background, arms crossed. You were never supposed to belong, she said softly. But look who stayed. Look who chose to belong. I stared at the photo long after she left. And realized something I hadn't been ready to face before. Revenge gave me the crown. But growth. That's what would make me a leader. I used to think the hardest part of rising to power was getting through the door. But no one tells you what it's like after you're inside. After the applause fades. After the headlines stop calling you a prodigy and start calling you responsible for everything. The bigger the empire, the louder the silence when it creaks. And mine was starting to creak. It began with an anonymous email. Subject line, your second in command is laundering loyalty. At first, I thought it was a joke. Maybe even a desperate smear. But inside was a zip file, copies of internal memos, red-line documents, and 2 flagged transactions made under Adrian's credentials. The money had been moved quietly from discretionary development funds into a shell entity. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. The same tactics I'd once used. The same strategy I'd weaponized to gain power. Had Adrian learned too well? I sent the file to our internal auditor. No panic. Just procedure. But I couldn't focus. All day, Adrian's name flashed across my screen, status reports, meeting invites, even a proposal for a new transit-connected housing initiative in Sacramento. On the surface, everything was fine. But I knew better than to trust the surface. By midnight, I was still in the office. Alone. Sleepless. That's when Marina called. "You're still up," she said. Not a question. I got a warning, I admitted. She didn't ask what kind. She knew. "I thought we were past this," I whispered. She sighed gently. "People don't change overnight, Isla. They stumble. They repeat. Sometimes they fall before they stand." The audit came back the next morning. Technically, Adrian hadn't done anything illegal. But he had approved the redirection of funds without board notification. The shell company was legit, a private contractor used before the merger, but the optics? Terrible. Especially when the media caught wind. Adrian Hollingsworth, the phoenix that may still burn, one headline read. Another, Solace scandal. Insiders question the XR's role in shifting funds. The board called an emergency session. Alan Cray was already on the warpath. "I warned you," he said. "He's a risk. I don't care if he saved East Bay. This puts all of us in jeopardy. We don't even know if it was intentional," I started. "Intent doesn't matter, Isla. Trust does." I was silent. Because I agreed. And didn't. That night, I met Adrian at the rooftop garden, the one he used to ignore when it was just a silly sustainability PR stunt. Now, it was his place of retreat. He was already there. Alone. Looking out at the skyline. "You heard?" he asked. I nodded. "I didn't steal," he said. "I used a vendor I thought we needed. Fast. Quiet. To close a deal before the city shut it down." I didn't speak. "I should have told you," he added. But I was afraid. Afraid it would look like the old me. "It does," I said. He flinched. "But it also looks like someone trying to solve a problem before it explodes." He turned to me. "So what happens now?" "I have to bring it to a vote," I replied. "You know that." He nodded slowly. "And what will you vote?" I didn't answer. Not because I didn't know. But because the answer hurt. The next morning, the board met. Adrian stood before them. No lawyer. No speech. He admitted what happened. Owned every mistake. Apologized without excuse. Then left the room so we could vote. One by one, the hands rose. Some fast. Some reluctant. When it was my turn, I paused. Then lifted mine. The motion passed. Adrian would be suspended for 60 days pending further review. When I found him afterward, he was in his office, packing a single bag. "You didn't have to vote with them," he said without venom. "Yes," I said. "I did." He looked up. "I'm not mad, Isla. I'm disappointed in myself, but thank you for holding me to a higher standard than I ever held myself." I walked over and handed him something, a copy of our internal code of ethics. "It's just paper," I said. "Until it becomes habit." He took it. Paused. Then said, "I'll be back. If you'll let me." I nodded once. But said nothing. 2 months later, the company had weathered the storm. Solace Group's reputation held. We launched a new community initiative. Profits climbed again. The media moved on. And I found myself, once again, staring out at a city I'd once been desperate to belong to. I had built the empire. Held it through scandal. Cast judgment on someone who'd once judged me. And I was still standing. But deep down, I wondered. Could I keep growing without becoming the very thing I once fought to replace? The day Adrian returned to Solace Group, no one applauded. There were no welcome banners. No second-chance speeches. Just a quiet nod from the receptionist, and a security badge that no longer unlocked the executive floor. He didn't complain. He showed up to his new desk, one cubicle over from a fresh hire named Sophia who didn't even know his last name, and opened his laptop like any other junior analyst. But I noticed. Because leadership, I'd come to learn, isn't about always doing. It's about watching. Listening. Sensing when a flame might be rekindling, or when it's about to burn everything down. And Adrian? He didn't flicker. He glowed. The reports he submitted were cleaner than anything he'd ever written. His emails, concise, professional, grateful. His tone in meetings, measured. Honest. More than once, I caught department heads asking, who wrote this proposal? Only to blink in surprise when his name came up. Still, I kept my distance. Not out of spite, but fear. Because the last time I trusted him, he nearly scorched the floor under both of us. So I waited. Until the day I found him alone in the blueprint vault. The place where we stored physical master plans, a quiet nod to the old ways, tucked into a glass-walled room few visited anymore. He was studying a decade-old Hollingsworth master layout. One I remembered being laughed out of for challenging years ago. You're not just reliving your greatest hits, are you? I asked, leaning against the doorframe. He smiled, small, real. This was your idea, wasn't it? He said, holding up the old plan. The transit overlay. The multi-use hubs. I nodded. Rejected. Too idealistic. He set the blueprint down. It would work now. I looked at him. And for the first time in a long time, I saw potential, not threat. We spent the next hour reworking the layout. Side by side. No titles. No ghosts in the room. Just pen, paper, and shared history. Later that week, I brought the revised plan into the boardroom. This was originally rejected, I said. But the city's zoning changes make it viable again. And we're uniquely positioned to do it right. What's changed? Alan Cray asked. I hesitated. Then said the truth. We have. I glanced at Adrian, seated 3 rows back. The board approved the project. Unanimously. And that night, I called Marina. Do you think people can change? I asked her. She paused. People grow, Isla. Change is too tidy a word. But growth. That's messy. And real. The next month was a whirlwind. Solace Group broke ground on 3 new sites. Our culture report went viral, praised for transparency, innovation, and something the press hadn't used in years, heart. And then came the offer. A global tech firm, Aurora Vision, wanted to partner on a cross-industry smart housing project. It would double our valuation overnight, and require a co-lead. Their choice. Adrian. Not me. Not exclusively. Him. Do you trust him? Alan asked me in private. I trust what he's becoming, I said. That's when I realized the shift. I was no longer chasing revenge. I was managing legacy. And that required one final, terrifying step. Letting go. 2 days later, I called Adrian into my office. He still knocked, always respectful now. "You're taking the Aurora project," I said. He blinked. "Are you sure?" "No," I admitted. "But I believe it's time." His eyes met mine. And something passed between us, not forgiveness, not finality, but acknowledgement. "You're not the enemy anymore," I said softly. "You're the one building beside me." He stood. And for the first time in 10 years, he offered his hand. I shook it. Firm. Equal. Clean. That night, I walked through the Solace offices, the floor plans I'd once studied in secret, the people who now greeted me as their leader, and I didn't feel tension. I felt trust. Not just theirs, but mine. Because I finally understood. Real power isn't about holding everything in your hands. It's about knowing when to place it in someone else's, and watching what they build with it. 3 years after the merger, I stood at the edge of a foundation slab, watching the sunrise bathe concrete and steel in soft amber light. This was the new Hollingsworth district. A neighborhood designed from the ruins of the old one, the one Adrian had once built, then neglected. Now, it was reborn. Parks instead of parking garages. Community hubs instead of gated towers. A living monument to transformation. A soft breeze tugged at my blazer. Behind me, workers began arriving. Architects. Planners. Engineers. Adrian was already on site, walking the perimeter with a clipboard in hand and dirt on his boots. He looked nothing like the man I'd met a decade ago. The golden air had been traded for something better. A builder. As I watched him point toward the skyline, explaining the vision to a young apprentice, I realized I hadn't thought about revenge in a long time. It no longer whispered to me when I fell asleep. It didn't drive my steps down office hallways. I had outgrown it, not because I'd forgotten what was done to me, but because I had forgiven myself for holding onto it so tightly for so long. You see, revenge is a fire that keeps you warm in the cold. But you can't live in fire forever. Eventually, you must build a home. A few weeks later, we hosted a company-wide celebration. 5 years of Solace Group. Thousands of units built. Dozens of communities transformed. Investors cheered. City officials shook hands. Journalists begged for exclusives. But that night, as the party died down, Marina found me alone on the upper terrace. She looked out at the glittering skyline. "It's funny," she said. "I always thought we were crashing someone else's legacy." I smiled. "Turns out we were just editing it." She sipped her wine, then pulled something from her purse, a framed photo. Us. Day 1. Standing outside the Hollingsworth gates, eyes full of hope and fear. And beside us, Adrian. Arms crossed. A scowl on his face. I laughed. "If I ever need a reminder of how far we've come." "That's not for you," she said, handing it to me. "It's for him. His version of that day is still unfinished." I left it in Adrian's office later that night. No note. No explanation. Just a memory, left like a seed. The next morning, I found it hanging on his wall. And beneath it, a handwritten quote in clean block letters. "Power isn't what you inherit. It's what you pass on." Weeks turned to months. Victor's health declined, slowly but steadily. One afternoon, I visited the lake house, finding him on the porch, wrapped in a heavy blanket, watching the trees sway. "I always thought I'd pass this company on to my son," he said. "You did," I replied. "Just not the way you imagined." He smiled. "I was wrong about a lot of things. But not about Marina. Or you." He passed in his sleep that winter. peacefully. At his memorial, Adrian stood beside me, not as an heir, not as a rival, but as something rarer. An equal. We didn't speak much that day. We didn't need to. The silence said everything. Later that year, I was invited to speak at a global leadership summit. Hundreds of founders, billionaires, innovators. The host asked me one question before I walked on stage. If you could leave one message behind, for the next generation of leaders, what would it be? I thought of Marina, the woman who never demanded credit. I thought of Victor, whose quiet faith in people had both built and nearly broken an empire. I thought of Adrian, rising not because he was forgiven, but because he chose to change. And then I stepped up to the microphone. My name is Isla Winters, I said. And I was once told I'd never be part of this family. A pause. A breath. But I didn't fight to prove I belonged. I fought to create something no one could take from me, not a title, not a company, not even a name. I fought to become someone worth following. The room stood. Not for the revenge, but for the growth. And in that moment, I knew. This story wasn't about what I took back. It was about what I built forward. And the legacy I chose to leave was no longer one of fire, but of light.